Thank you very much. Alright, part two. Basically, the second part is only about Oswald's legal rights, legal representation, lawyer, and so forth. Now, we're going to start with a ton of video, because what we're going to do is now basically, I'm going to show you the amount of times that he asked for a lawyer, and the amount of times that he basically said, I had nothing to do with the killing of David. Part of it will be the press conference. I'm going to show you two videos on that, and there's going to be some silent video as well. So I'm going to start with the silent video, just looping them. Yeah.
I didn't shoot anybody.
Hold on. Can't have that one yet.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir.
Can't have that one either. More silent footage. I'm just going to do the silent footage first. This is when Oswald is in the lift, and he's overheard by one of the filmmakers basically saying, I didn't shoot anyone. This is in Richard Strass's book, and this is the first evidence that Oswald inside City Hall said, I didn't shoot anyone, while he was in that elevator. Right. Now, let's go. Hello? Wrong screen. Let's go to. Right. This is the same clip, but the first clip starts later and stops later, and the other one starts a bit before and stops quicker. The reason being is that two questions aren't being told. Number one, did he shoot anyone? Number two, does he have a lawyer? This is in the very beginning, and that's Richard Sims to his left.
Sir, I haven't been told what I'm here for. You have a lawyer? No, sir, I don't. I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for. You have a lawyer? No, sir, I don't.
Right.
I've been told what I'm here for. I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
He shoot the president.
I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for.
There's absolutely no clue whatsoever what he's here for. Alright, we'll get further on that. We'll elaborate on that in a minute. Okay, next film.
Inspector, will you roll it, please? Suspect.
You weren't supposed to give me a hearing without legal representation or anything. You shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody.
You just said Oswald said he did not shoot anybody.
Hearing without legal representation, and I didn't shoot anybody. Again, denying shooting anyone, and again saying I don't have a lawyer. Well, on top of that, he got a hearing without a lawyer. Get back to that in a moment as well. I've tried to basically collect every bit of footage out of every documentary as such to point out how many times he actually said it. This is a scene, this is roughly at 10 to 8 on the 22nd, less than 6 hours after his arrest. The first question that's being asked to him is, did you shoot the president? And it's very hard to hear, because I had to play it 10, 15 times. He says, no, I didn't shoot anybody. People keep asking me that. And then he comes to the bit where he says, I had a hearing without a lawyer, and so forth. And then comes the famous Patsy remark that basically within 6 hours he already claims that he's basically being sheep-dipped as such. Right.
Here comes a man again.
I'd like some legal representation. The police officers have not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about. I work in that building. Naturally, if I work in that building, yes, sir. No, they're taking me in because of the fact that I live in the suburbs. I'm just a patsy.
There you go. In 6 hours of his arrest, while he's basically being transported into Wolf Fritz's office. And then, the 23rd.
Dallas police, on the one hand,
The 23rd starts, of course, with Oswald and the press conference. That's what it basically starts with. Now, the press conference is done roughly at about 12:30. Now, I showed you the video where basically those press guys are asking Wade and Curry whether they can see him as such. Now, this press conference is a result. I'm going to show you two recordings. One by CNN. It wasn't taken by CNN, but they put that together in a documentary. And the other one is, I think, comes from 3 Shots documentary. There's different footage and also different editing as such.
committing all the resources to try to solve a crime. On the other hand, they were ill-equipped.
What's funny is that Oswald doesn't say a word while he's being transported to that room, where it's been vocal all the time. So it must have been said, keep your mouth shut in the corridor, get there, then you can say whatever you want to say. But of course, it wasn't meant to last long.
But to handle this tsunami of reporters.
Well, I was questioned by a judge, however, I protested at that time that I was not allowed.
He talks about David Johnston basically arraigning him as such, and basically also the fact that, again, he doesn't have legal representation.
Mr. President.
No, I have not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
You have to.
Sir?
You have to.
The confusion is big in this whole thing, because not only is Oswald being told, the press knows before him that he's going to be charged with the murder of JFK. He doesn't know anything about it. And look at the look on his face of utter disbelief and thinking, well, sorry for swearing, but it basically says, I'm fucked. That's the look on his face when he's basically being told, you are being charged with the killing of the president as such. The second also, in the background you hear, somebody said what, and then somebody else screams, at ease, this, that, and the other. And this is where that whole, it becomes clutter. And at that point, Jesse Curry pulls the plug. It was Jesse Curry who pulled the plug on the whole thing, right there and then. He stood a little bit to the right, and he basically said to the detectives, come on, pull that.
A policeman hit me.
Yeah, how did you get that cut?
Yeah, that was in the Texas theater. But there's a question being asked to him as well beforehand, just like that. It says, what were you doing in Russia? And he didn't have time to actually explain that because he gets pulled away. But he does have time to basically answer that question as such. Now let's look at the other one. A great video. That's wrong. My bad, sorry. That's the wrong video.
As the evidence accumulates and the public becomes aware of the increasing police suspicion, Lee Oswald is shuttled back and forth through the corridors of police headquarters to face witness after witness.
That's the biggest.
He also is brought into a wild and noisy press gathering where the police permit a few questions.
I really don't know what the situation is about. Nobody has told me of murder with police.
Now you hear the difference. The commotion, the racket, everything. A lot of people had absolutely no idea how they could hear what Oswald was actually saying. So the people with the microphones at the front, of course, they captured it all crisply. But at the same time, in the background, there was a lot of racket.
I know nothing more than that, and I do request someone to come forward to give me legal assistance.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet. The first thing I heard about was when the newspaper reporters in the hall asked me that question.
All of Lee Oswald's denials, direct or indirect, investigators reach an opposite conclusion. revealed by District Attorney Henry Wade.
So during that press conference, 3 times he mentioned legal assistance for someone to come forward. Didn't have anyone with him while he was basically being arraigned for the Tippett murder. Now that press conference was about 5-6 hours after his so-called arraignment for the Tippett murder. Now on the 23rd, that's when he wears
Just dispatches, you people have been getting that.
a white t-shirt on.
Fire that rifle. Just dispatches, you people have been getting that. I emphatically deny these charges.
The difference in the treatment of the DPD is that they try to keep him away from the press as much as possible. When they then have to move in for the interrogations and such, they do this really quick. They shield him off and they barely give him a chance to say anything because they know he's been flapping, blubbing like mad the day before as such. And of course they try to rein that in the town. Okay, now I hope I found
Now as policemen, on the one hand, they were committing
No,
all the
yeah.
resources.
Fire that rifle.
No. This is about Oswald's hygienic rights, if I'm not mistaken. That's C.W. Brown.
Lee Oswald on his way.
His back is dirty, you can't quite see him. His wings are still.
Basic fundamental hygienic rights, I mean like the shower and the go.
That's Lee Oswald for the second time today, being taken in for questioning into the homicide bureau of the detective division. He must have said something.
So that's only 2 movies, but basically Oswald is able to say something of some sort. Now, what happened with these arraignments? Right, okay. The first arraignment was for the Tippett murder. Now, when you look at the material that's been released and the documents and such, you can only come to one conclusion, is that they barely investigated the president's murder as such. They were more focused on Tippett's murder from the word get-go. Lavelle worked on that side. He was basically doing the lineups as such. The stories you read about those lineups, is that Markham basically had to be given smelling salts because she fainted and she was hysterical, basically to try to point it out. Howard Brennan basically admitted that he saw the picture of Oswald before he went into that room, so he was already basically tainted in that respect. On top of that, he was blind as a bat. He couldn't see shit up there. Couldn't. He was really had terrible eyesight. So there was no way in hell he could ID Oswald as such. This is what Fritz and others are saying. Are basically saying as such that I've got 6 witnesses that point him out as the guy basically beating up in that 6th floor window as such. That is the only thing they probably used at that point on that day to tie him to the Kennedy murder. Everything else is aimed at Tippett. Everything is more important. Tippett is more important as such. Right, now, then he gets arraignment as such. We have here David Johnston on the right being interviewed. That's the actual document, but it gets better.
Justice of the peace,
When you
David
ask-
Johnston.
When you ask the participants of that particular arraignment, that arraignment was done inside Fritz's office. So, Fritz's office inside room 317. That's where the arraignment was held. Oswald had no lawyer present whatsoever. And basically being told he's basically being filed on the murder of J.D. Tippett as such. Now there are people that make remarks where he said like, this is ridiculous, or this is the trial, or whatever. I don't really believe them. I don't think Oswald said much anyway, because what's even more important is the fact that, well, he probably said like, I need a lawyer for this, but the most important part is the testimony of the participants that are actually there. Jesse Curry, Will Fritz, Elmer Ward, and so on. And when they're being asked what Oswald actually said, not one of them can actually recollect pretty much what was being said as such. So they're completely stumped about the whole thing. But it gets worse, much, much worse. And that's the so-called arraignment for Kennedy, for the Kennedy assassination at about 1 o'clock in the morning. So Oswald goes to the press conference just before, apparently, the murder complaint against JFK has been signed. Oswald is not being told at all. And that, of course, becomes obvious during the press conference because he has no idea what the hell is happening to him. You can see that in the facial expression. But it gets worse. Because at that time, Oswald's basically being brought up to the 4th floor, and where his pictures are taken. I don't have them on here, but it's the ones, the mugshot, for instance. They did not take a mugshot of him on the 22nd at all. The first mugshot is basically being taken. Him in his white t-shirt on the 23rd. And on top of that, there's a picture of him standing in between 2 policemen as well. Those shots were basically taken after his shirt was taken away from him, after the press conference, which goes to the FBI in a jet plane off to Washington with Vince Drain. And at the same time, he basically gets booked and photographed, fingerprinted again, because he was fingerprinted about 3 or 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. And he then goes up to his cell. That's what the official documentation says. It goes from the press conference to pictures to his cell. And all of a sudden, the arraignment for JFK is slotted in that whole bit. And there is not one person that can actually say, yeah, it happened. But the worst giveaway of all of it are actually the newspapers. Because you know what? Hardly any newspaper makes mention of Oswald's arraignment for JFK's murder as such. There are 4 newspapers that do. And Timothy Schweik investigated this in the 90s. I think it was in the 3rd or the 4th Decade magazine. And he started digging into these newspapers. One of them was the New York Times, and he couldn't find the article. It was on a microfiche copy, but an actual hard copy that shows that Oswald was arraigned is not there. It doesn't exist. Then there's only one paper, and that's the Evening Bulletin from Philadelphia. And this is where they actually mention the word arraignment as such. No other paper in the United States makes mention of arraignment of Oswald in Kennedy at that time. No one. No one makes it up. But it gets worse. Then when you look at the documentation as such, who was there, who did what, etc., etc. Well, Jim Lavelle can't even confirm it because, I hope I'm going the right way, there you go. Now the thing was, the captain, Will Fritz, the head of homicide, who was running the interrogation of Oswald, asked me if I had enough to make a case on him for the Tippit killing. And I said, oh yeah, I got plenty of that. I had him identified by about 3 or 4 people, so Cap said, well, go ahead and make a tight case on him in case we have trouble making this one on the presidential shooting. So that was one reason he was arraigned early on the Tippit shooting. But I was thinking that we also arraigned him somewhere down the line on the shooting of the president. But I wouldn't swear to it. Oh, this is from Joe McBride's book. He interviewed Lavelle in the early 90s. And Lavelle gave a couple of things. He let his guard down a bit. He wasn't inventing fairy tales like he usually does, but this time he basically let his guard down a bit. And also when he's being asked, I'm going to apologize in advance for this, but basically when he was asked how important the Kennedy killing was, he basically, and I'm just loosely from memory, described it as a South Dallas nigger shooting at any time. It didn't make any difference whatsoever. We did our job regardless, blah, blah, blah. So that was Lavelle letting his guard down. So, there's hardly anyone who can basically support and say Oswald was arraigned with a lawyer after the press conference and such. The newspapers can't confirm it. Hardly any of the police can confirm it. And the biggest whopper is, of course, left for Jim Hosty, because Jim Hosty makes a report up. I don't have it on here, but he makes a report up and he says, do you know what? We didn't arraign him because he was already arraigned for Tippit. I'm thinking, what? The president? You know, compared to a copper? So, and you're not getting arraigned for that murder or stuff? They basically just piled it on top. So the bottom line is, from my investigation, I can clearly say that Oswald was not arraigned for the murder of JFK. And on top of that, on the interrogation on the 24th, he asked Fritz, am I being filed on for the president's murder? Now think about that. Had he been filed on more than 24 hours earlier, in the middle of the night, he would have known that. He would have said, I've been filed on for this murder charge and so forth. Yet he asked Fritz on Sunday morning whether he's being filed on and such. Now, had he been filed on, he would have said, I've been filed on, I know about it, blah, blah, blah. But he was still questioning Fritz whether he was going to be filed on as such. That's quite an important thing. There's another thing, and this is when we get to the lawyers bit. Here you go. John Apt. Well, everybody talks about John. Oh, he wanted Apt, he wanted this, he wanted that. From my research, I can tell you that the name John Apt doesn't appear on November 22nd at all. Had he appeared in public, the name, and said like, I want Apt, Apt would have been called before he buggered off to Connecticut to his little holiday home that weekend as such. And it's funny, press managed to get hold of Apt, didn't know anything about it on Saturday, etc., etc., didn't know about it. On top of that, the only evidence that I've seen so far, real evidence, is from David Johnston, but also from H. Louis Nichols on the right hand side. I'll show you a video in a moment. But basically, H. Louis Nichols interviewed Oswald around 6 p.m. on the 23rd. And that's when the name Apt came out, because Jesse Curry got H. Louis Nichols basically come on telly and explain that.
My name is H. Louis Nichols, Louis Nichols. I'm Nichols. I'm the president of the Dallas Bar Association, the organized bar here in Dallas. We have been advised that statements have been made that Mr. Oswald was unable to get any Dallas lawyer who would make any inquiry about representation, or that he was unable to get any representation here in Dallas. When I heard about that this afternoon, I decided I should come down and make inquiry as to whether or not he was represented by counsel, whether or not he desired to be represented by counsel, and whether or not he would ask the Dallas Bar Association to furnish representation to him. I have just visited with him in his cell, and he advises that his first preference is that he be represented by a lawyer in New York, whose name I believe is John Apt, A-B-T. He then stated that if he could not be represented by that individual, he would like to have a lawyer who was a member of the American Civil Liberties Union represent him.
All right, this is important because he mentions Apt for the first time at 6 o'clock. So what we're talking about, what, 36 hours after the actual event as such, a bit less than that. That when finally the name John Apt come out. It's also come out from the evidence that I found is that Apt doesn't exist on the 22nd. But worse is that Fritz basically said he didn't want a lawyer. Now, as you see, he says it talks about the Civil Liberties Union. Civil Liberties Union, this is something I started digging in, about 9 months ago. And our main guy of that is a guy called Greg Olds. He's still alive. I think I should call him soon. I've got quite a few questions. Greg Olds gets called in the evening on the 22nd and basically being told that they're worried about Oswald's civil and legal rights as such.
Well, it's the first time.
Now, the ACLU was regarded as a bunch of commie agitators in that time, okay? So when you're talking about civil liberty and this, that, and the other, that's a dirty word in Dallas at that time. So someone who's basically come up for someone's legal rights, forget about it. So these guys, Greg Olds and one of the others is Greer Reggio. That's the second guy on the right with the bow tie. They make their way to DPD with two others whose identity I haven't uncovered yet. But they go down there and they try to talk to Earl Cabot, the mayor of Dallas, the CIA asset. And basically they can't get access to him. So then they try to talk to Fritz. They can't get hold of Fritz either. But they end up talking to Captain King, who I showed you earlier. And Captain King basically deflects it together with a person who is even more interesting. Mr. Charles Webster. Charles Webster is a lawyer and he's been hanging around there. And I don't know what he's done there, but what he did was help deflect the ACLU away from getting into touch with Oswald as such. Oswald was a member of the ACLU. Roughly 3 weeks before, him and Mike Payne go to an ACLU meeting. And there's talk about Oswald talking to a projectionist, blah, 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 blah. Whatever the content was, they tried to find out. It wasn't anything special. Oswald pays $2 for membership as well. And this is where the ACLU looks really funny, because the ACLU actually pretends that Oswald is not a member. Then it takes him 3 weeks to dig out his membership card and his check that he sent as such. It was not only till about mid-December that they finally start coming clean about this whole membership group as such. So, Olds and Raggio, they meet Webster. Webster is also involved with assassin General Walker the year before that as such. He worked at, what is it, SMT? Yeah, Southern Methodist University, I think. And Olds and Raggio basically split up after they'd basically been fobbed off by Captain King and by Charles Webster. And Olds goes to the press conference. Now what I don't understand is that Olds left after the press conference because he thought it was all taken care of. At that very same press conference, also asked for legal representation or for someone to come forward during that. Now, the only excuse I would give is that because of the racket I couldn't hear what was happening. Depends on where we were standing as such. But it's very interesting, and Webster needs definitely more investigating as such. Now, did anyone else offer Oswald any legal representation? Yes, he did. There's a man called Harold E. McDermott. He lived in Chicago. He tried to call the police on the 22nd, and then ended up sending a telegram on the 23rd. Whenever you're ready. And on the 23rd, and this document basically disappears. Fritz says he can't find it, whereas it's just in the DPG archives. And on top of that, this guy basically just wants to give Oswald legal representation. This document is not shown to Oswald, this telegram. It is basically being hidden. Only Curry and Fritz know about this particular telegram, where he basically offers them. There you go. Fritz also says to Olds that they were too busy to get him a lawyer or let him make a phone call as such because we were busy with fingerprints, lineups, interrogations, and so forth. It's about the most feeblest excuse I can think of for someone denying actually his legal right. Right, now, this is a different angle. Barefoot Sanders, District Attorney, Texas. Attorney General. Here he is, leaning against with his butt, right there on the right. That's Jesse Curry with the Dallas Police Department badge, and he's shaking Kennedy's hand. This is before, this is, I think it was a year before, 2 years before the shooting happened. A better protection then. Barefoot Sanders basically comes into play because he's actually Martha Jo Stroud's super boss. Martha Jo Stroud became known because of the document she did with Dorothy Garner. Dorothy Garner saw Truly and Baker come up the stairs after the ladies, Victoria Adams and Sandra Stiles, actually walked down as such. That document was suppressed. It wasn't found until 1999 by Gary Ernest, first book, Girl on the Stairs. But also, Martha Jo Stroud last year came back in the picture because there is a document that she wrote as well about Will Fritz refusing to sign off on his affidavit and his testimony as such. He wanted to change things, and she wrote about that to the commission. Now, Sanders himself has trouble because there is no federal law against killing the president. So there's some documentation, I think you gave it to me. Yeah, I think so. I think it's part of the William Manchester thing. And he basically, and he basically claims that they didn't know, and they spent all afternoon trying to figure out under what law to actually charge him with. And he then also makes phone calls, and basically, because Bill Alexander, I'll get him up in a minute, Bill Alexander tried to basically write in the charge sheet that it was part of an international communist conspiracy. And that's about the last thing they want. They want a lone nutter. They don't want somebody who's part of a vast conspiracy as such. So he basically makes the phone calls and makes sure that that doesn't get mentioned inside the paperwork as such. Right. Bill Alexander. Alexander carried a gun. He's an assistant DA. He was at the Texas Theater. He was a Tippett. Got in the car, went straight after the action. It's quite unexplainable, but then again, Captain Westbrook's departure is as bad as that. Alexander was known for putting people on the electric chair. Hardcore. Just like James K. Allen, I don't know what he said. Yeah, so you've got James K. Allen in that room, and you've got him in that room, and with Fritz, with the three of them, and they are interrogating Oswald as such. There's no chance in hell that you'd make your way out of that unless you come up with a picture or a video that shows that you weren't there as such. Alexander himself makes a mess because he later on basically states in the newspapers that Earl Warren shouldn't be gotten rid of like through impeachment. He should be hung instead, and that's what he said. That basically cost him his job, and they basically asked him to go, and he went into private practice ever since. I've got quite a bit of documentation about his quotes about Oswald. I'm not going to get into that now, but it's a lot of juicy reading in that paper actually. Alexander's quite a colourful person as such. Right. James Allen, really quick. A couple of pics on the right. There he is. Okay, now I want to go to David Johnston. Now, Johnston was there that day, everywhere. That's Alexander talking to Hosty. There, David Johnston on the right. And Hosty even got the paper with the assassination headlines. There's Johnston again. And on the left is our so-called Roger Craig look-alike. The more I think about it, the more I think it's Secret Service Charles Kunkel. And here he is as well, talking. He was everywhere. Now, let's see if I can find that video. We're all happy bunnies. One more. That's outside his office. There's Fritz, Alexander behind him, and Johnson there with an arrow pointed at him as such.
Justice of the Peace, David John.
This is an ABC interview that's after the press conference as such. I'm only going to play just a minute so you can hear what he actually says at the very after about a minute.
Mr. of the 2nd Precinct of Dallas County, before whom suspect Lee Oswald was formally charged tonight with the murder of President Kennedy. Judge Johnston, could you read for us the official affidavit?
This is in the name of and by the authority of the state of Texas, personally appeared before me, the undersigned authority, this affiant, who after being by me duly sworn, disposes and says, your affiant has good reason to believe and does believe that one Lee Harvey Oswald, hereinafter styled defendant, heretofore on or about the 22nd day of November, A.D. 1963, in the county of Dallas and state of Texas, did then and there unlawfully, voluntarily, and with malice of forethought, kill John F. Kennedy by shooting him with a gun against the peace and dignity of the...
So the arraignment, the paperwork, has been done, right? For JFK.
Attested by J.W. Fritz, affiant, sworn to and subscribed before me this 22nd day of November 1963, Henry Wade, Criminal District Attorney, Dallas County, Texas, which complaint was then passed to me at 11:26 p.m. and filed as cause number F-154, the state of Texas versus Lee Harvey Oswald for the offense of murder.
Did you read this before the suspect?
This complaint has not been read to the suspect. The prior complaint filed at a little after 7 o'clock last night was read to the defendant. And
there you go. basically says we've already put it together, it's all there, filed, and so forth. Yeah, but the person that's supposed to know about it, he's absent. He doesn't know about it. He's having a kid. That's actually what's happening. Also, sleeping while basically so-called paperwork was basically being taken care of. Shocking, I know. I'm running out of end. I thought I was not going to do this quick, but I am. I've done all this, done all that. Yeah, I'm running out of end. The bottom line of what I've read so far is that A, Oswald was denied a lawyer on the 22nd. Guaranteed he would not be able. He didn't make any phone calls. He didn't start making phone calls until about the 23rd, I think roughly 4 o'clock when he spoke to Ruth Payne. And Ruth Payne did bugger all to help him. She couldn't be bothered. And she was an ACLU member, just like Oswald and Mike Payne. She didn't do anything about it. And then there's the rally call, of course. I still need to study that a little bit more. I've watched all the video and saw the video of Grover Proctor. I don't know whether it happened or not, but the thing is, like, he must have made quite a few calls then. That's the problem. And the only thing that right now that is this massive black hole is that Oswald made a call, I think it's around 5 o'clock, for half an hour, and nobody knows what it was about. The only thing is that the jailer timed him for that phone call as such. But other than that, there's absolutely no idea who it could be, who he spoke with as such. Yeah, so this is roughly like what I'm telling you now is where I'm at with the investigation. The second paper, the updated paper will probably come out in May or June when I get all the material together, because I've ordered some more stuff. And then after that, there'll be videos that will be a little bit more concise than this dribble, just as such. Anyway, thanks.
Sorry, I don't know whether I missed it, or when you had the picture of Alexander up in the top right-hand corner,
Yeah.
underneath it said, Alexander wonders whether Oswald was a CIA agent.
Well, no, it was actually FBI agent, and that story is actually originated by Lonnie Hotchkiss. Lonnie Hotchkiss was a reporter in Dallas, who also claimed to be there in the interrogations, etc. And he put that whole story together that Oswald was an FBI agent. When Wade and Alexander went to Washington to talk about it as such, there's a 7-page memo, I think, written by Rankin, and it doesn't go anywhere. Nobody can basically point out that Oswald was, with evidence that Oswald was a federal informant as such. Possibly, I don't know. Oswald's got whiffs of intelligence over him anyway, regardless, but the problem is that can you just say with clarity, like, it was him, he was part of that organization, whether it was ONI, CIA, but that's not really my main interest as such. I'm more interested in trying to present a picture of all these people that were involved and what they did and how they do it, and also in what type of setting, because that's another thing. If you just talk about Texas law overall, Henry Wade, basically, there's a book on Henry Wade, I've shown this before, written by, I forgot his name, he was the district attorney himself, an assistant district attorney, and he wrote about it, and it basically says that the cases of, not mistrial, but wrongful convictions, right? It's 10 times the nation's average in the States under Henry Wade as such. And that got me looking into some older cases from the late 50s and so forth, and how people just got sent on the electric chair through these so-called interrogation methods, part of the Reed technique or not, and basically sent to the electric chair. It involved a lot of black people, so the racism thing as well, it barely gets discussed in the JFK assassination, but civil rights was a big thing, and racism was a huge thing. I mean, that hasn't been rooted out as such, and of course that makes its mark on justice as well, of course. There's 2 types, one for white people and one for communist agitators and black people, basically. Simple as that. So that's all I can say about it. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
How do you know about the half-an-hour call?
Sorry?
The phone call, it took half an hour.
That was because of the jailers. The jailers have a document, and that document describes that Oswald was for 30 minutes on the phone, but he did not overhear what was being said as such.
Is that in the Dallas police record?
Yeah. Well, I can email it to you. I'll probably have it in my other laptop. So, yeah. That's also because the jailers also recorded the times that Oswald came back to jail after the so-called press conference, and therefore he couldn't have been arraigned, because the timing from T.L. Baker, the timing from the jailer, and so forth, that basically messes with that. It can't be done. And Oswald wasn't arraigned for the Kennedy murder. That's one thing that's obvious. That's definitely. That's as fake as a second floor lunchroom encounter. That's easy to say, basically. Same thing. And the same thing is with it, denying him his legal rights for the first 24, 30 hours. That was another thing. Had he called a lawyer, he would have had a lawyer in right then. Didn't have it. Instead of that, it was basically being dragged through the corridor. And therefore, he says, I want a lawyer. Now, I don't know how you rhyme this, like Fritz saying he doesn't want a lawyer, and the excuses he used for not getting him one to all. And then at the same time, I've got Oswald running around the corridor, basically exclaiming all that, and the press conference and so forth. And that's the thing. The first day, he had nothing, no one to help him, basically. Well, there was plenty of help available and offered, but it didn't get to him. Another thing that Lewis Nichols said was that, let me play this video, we've got time, don't we? Nichols said,
What point in that?
Oswald was held incommunicado. Now, Nichols saw him at 5:30, 6 o'clock, on the 23rd.
The first few days you became a television star and a media star, did you not?
Well, I was on television after I had talked to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Tell us, go back to the beginning of that and tell us how that came about. Where were you when you first learned the president had
The president was assassinated on Friday.
Where were you?
At the World Trade Center, my wife and I were there for a luncheon that they were having for the president. And we had to get there early because he was due at 12 o'clock. We had to get there at 11:30. Everybody's to be seated the time the president got there. And we were there, and the police officer I knew came to run us by. I said, what's going on? I said, can't tell you, he died now. And he came back and said the president had been shot. And then someone else came up on the stage at Roston, and they said the president had been shot. And of course, the luncheon was canceled, and we left and went home. And then heard the rest of the news later on about he had died. The next day, a Saturday afternoon, I received a telephone call from a lawyer friend of mine whose name I forgot. And he wanted to know if Lee Harvey Oswald had a lawyer. I said, I don't know if he had a lawyer or not. Why do you want to know? He said, well, he had received a call from a lawyer up in the East Coast, who was dean of the law school, and said that the news media up there was saying that Oswald couldn't get a Dallas lawyer to represent him. And this fellow said, well, I just want to know if you knew anything about it. I said, I don't know anything about it. He said, well, can you or will you do anything about it? And I said, I don't know. I'll look into it. That's perfect excuse. And so after I talked to him, I thought well about it. So I called a lawyer friend of mine who practiced criminal law. But I had forgotten what the obligation was to provide attorneys for inmates. It's just something I never run into except in school. And he said that until a person has been indicted, there was no obligation at that time to provide a lawyer. This was before the Miranda case, 3 years before the Miranda case came down. And he said once he's indicted, it comes to the attention of a judge that doesn't have a lawyer, well, he'll appoint one. I said, well, that takes care of it. Nothing else we do about that. He had not been indicted, there's no obligation. Got another call shortly after, another lawyer, he'd gotten a call from the dean of the law school up east, and said that, why can't Oswald get a lawyer? I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I got a call from this dean up there, and he says that the Dallas lawyers won't represent him. I said, well, I don't know anything about it. I told him what I had done, and I said, I don't know any more for us to do. He said, well, will you do something? I said, well, I don't know what to do, but I'll look into it. And so I got to thinking about it, and decided that maybe somebody ought to do something. Because nobody appeared to be doing anything. So I called Henry Wade's office and talked to Henry, he was district attorney, and asked him if he knew whether Oswald had a lawyer. He said he didn't know, it hadn't been brought to his attention. One way or the other. He said he was going up to City Hall later and that he'd make some inquiry, and if they were interested anyway, he'd have somebody call me, and I said, well, let me know. Then I called Glenn King, who was the chief police assistant,
Again, Clapton.
administrative assistant, and I said, I asked Glenn about it. I said, does Oswald have a lawyer? He said, well, I don't know what he has, does not. I said, has anyone come to see you? And he said, no. And then I told him my interest in what I found out, and I said, if he wants a lawyer, you know about it, but tell him of our conversation. He said, well, I'll put it back. Well, you just come up and see him yourself if you want to. And I said, I'm not prepared to do that. I hadn't thought about doing that. The more I thought about it, I didn't know what to do. Then I got a call from Charlie Galvin, who's professor out at SU, and he said, Les, what are you doing about Oswald getting a lawyer? I said, I don't know, not doing anything. I didn't know I was supposed to do anything. He said, well, I think you ought to go up there. He didn't say we ought to go up there and talk to him. I think you ought to go up and talk to him and find out what the situation is. I said, well, I'm not sure whether I should do that or not. I did not know whether I should go and do anything as president of the Bar Association. I had not been authorized to do it. I hadn't talked to anybody on the board of directors or anything about it. But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, somebody's got to do something. And nobody is, so I'll just do it. So I changed clothes, went up to City Hall, and asked for the chief, and he wasn't in, Glenn King wasn't in. And then the chief came in, whom I knew, and he said, what are you doing here, Lewis? And I said, well, Glenn King said I could come up and talk to Oswald, Mr. Oswald, if he needs a lawyer. He said, well, come on, I'll take you. And so he took me up to the next floor and went into a room about as big as this. There were 3 cells, and somebody was in the middle and nobody knew what to do. There was Oswald. He opened the door, introduced me to Oswald, and said, as president of the Bar Association, I come see if he needs a lawyer. And he just put me in the cell, locked the door, and walked away. Well, I reintroduced myself to Oswald and suggested we sit down. So we sat down on the bunks just practically knee to knee, and I asked him if he had a lawyer or needed a lawyer. And he wanted a fellow named John Apt, who was a New York lawyer. He said, I didn't know him. And he said, well, he knew him, he knew of him, and if he could get a lawyer, he was the one he wanted. But he said, if I can't get one, well, I might call you. I said, let it be honest. I said, do you want the Dallas Bar Association to get you a lawyer or help you get a lawyer? And he said, not now. I said, that's all I want to know. I'll get you a lawyer, or try to get you a lawyer if you can. He said, no, not now. May call on you next week. Well, if I know he was shot the next day, I'd ask him some more questions, but I didn't ask him anything. So I knocked on the door, and they came over and let me out. And then I went out and the interview was talking about on television. Quite a few reporters all
camped out down there.
That 3rd floor was just jammed like that with news media. Yeah. But it turned out that it was fortunate that I did what I did, I guess, because the lawyers did not get criticized. Of all the people in Dallas on the Kennedy assassination, the lawyers did not get criticized. It was dumb luck, I guess, on my part.
And we're being criticized now. So look at that.
I think it was dumb luck. It was good judgment.
Well, it turned out to be fortunate.
Yeah. Fortunate for all of us.
Yeah.
At some point,
I say Louis Nichols.
the first 2 days you became,
And I just realized Forrest Sorrells, when Forrest Sorrells interviews Oswald, the first interview he does, which gets about an hour after Oswald's basically been interrogated by Fritz, Sorrells takes Oswald outside the little room that Fritz has, and the bigger room. And he takes him away and he starts talking to him, and it is about 5 minutes. And this conversation has not been scripted, or transcribed, or any cut. But what Sorrell says, from the documents you gave me, basically says, that Oswald was inquiring with Sorrells whether he was a lawyer. He didn't think he was a Secret Service agent as such. He thought he was a lawyer and basically discussed this with him at first. And of course, he then explains, no, I'm from the Secret Service and I'm not going to get you a lawyer as such. So from the 22nd, it's obvious A, he was denied a lawyer, B, he asked several times about a lawyer. He emphatically denied shooting anyone on several occasions as well. It can't get shakier, can it? So anyway, I think I've reached the end of this now. So thank you all very much, and hopefully you'll be reading my paper later this year.